Burgundy and Gold review. My name is Jess of HGTR.Nation on Instagram, obviously joined by my co-host Sam of WSH Football 365, also on Instagram. And today we've got something special for our viewers. We are joined by Mitch Tischler of NBC Sports Washington. We're excited to get some insider knowledge from Mitch, and we'll be breaking down some of the recent news that's transpired with Washington within the past week. So, Mitch, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to do this.
So I guess we'll get the ball rolling. Sam and I have already shared, some of our thoughts on free agency and the draft as they've happened. But what are some of the highlights, or lowlights, some big moves? Obviously, a lot of stuff transpiring in every offseason with Washington, it seems. But just what stuck out to you so far?
Yeah, it's never quiet in Ashburn, DMV, whatever you want to call it, for the Washington football team. But I think the biggest storyline of the offseason is just the way Ron Rivera has kind of overhauled this entire roster. You're down to just a handful of players that are left from 2 years ago when he got here, and getting rid of veterans like Brian Kerrigan, Morgan Moses, Nick Sundberg, guys who were staples on this franchise for the past, almost decade or more for some of them, I think is a huge storyline. And you're seeing Ron bring in a lot of guys who are quote unquote his guys, and he's not messing around with previous regimes' players, and he wants his dudes in there, and that's what we're seeing.
It's really nice to watch Ron practice what he preaches, and I've heard a couple times you guys mentioned before him saying to players, I'll cut your ass if he doesn't follow by that rule. Going into a little bit about Morgan Moses, I don't think a lot of people really saw this one coming, but maybe there was a little bit of a rumor of a money situation going on there. What's your thoughts on that, Mitch? Do you think he was asking for a little bit of money and they didn't want to give it to him? They wanted to motivate themselves to get younger. What are your thoughts on that?
Interesting. So I was surprised, as everybody else was. I mean, every NFL franchise needs 3 tackles on a roster, and if you include Morgan Moses, Charles Leno, Cornelius Lucas, Sam Cosby, they had 4. So there was wiggle room where they could have potentially gotten rid of him. I think this is more of Ron going and getting his guy. And if you kept Morgan Moses and had Charles Leno as your bookend tackles, there wasn't really an avenue where you were going to be able to get any sort of playing time for your rookie, Sam Cosby. And it's going to be tough to develop, obviously, if you're not getting much time on the field. That being said, Charles Leno in Chicago was the same situation as Morgan Moses was here. They drafted Tevin Jenkins, the rookie out of Oklahoma State, decided to get rid of Charles Leno because they had the young guy come in. Morgan Moses, same thing when you look at Sam Cosby. So clearly they want to get Cosby some time on the right side. He has predominantly played on the left, but certainly has experience on the right-hand side as well. Morgan Moses was a veteran dude. He was a guy who was durable. He was durable. He was a leader on that O-line. And, there's obviously a lot of consternation amongst fans about the penalties and stuff in years past. But last year was arguably the best year of his career. So I think he's going to not be on the trade/free agency list long. I think someone's going to snap him up, and he's going to have an opportunity to earn a second contract.
To piggyback off that a little bit, do you have any potential trade partners in mind that Washington might be interested in doing business with for Morgan Moses?
I severely doubt it. I think the Bears saw it with Charles Leno. They tried to trade him, couldn't, ultimately ended up cutting him. I think you're going to see the same thing with Morgan Moses. Once you kind of put it out there that you're allowing a guy to find a trade partner, there's a good opportunity that there's a good chance that guy's not going to be back with the organization. At this point, teams know that he's going to be cut eventually, so maybe somebody's going to throw a day 3 pick, and I would think closer to the back end of day 3 than the front end of day 3. So you might be looking at a 6th or 7th rounder if another team doesn't want to battle him on the open market. But I think ultimately he's going to end up cut on the open market and sign somewhere else. So, the talk about, they're finally getting rid of a player while he still has some value and they get something back for him, I think is a little bit of a flawed tactic or a flawed reasoning. I think that they just want to go with the young guy. I think they want to give Sam Cosby every opportunity to earn that starting job and get some time on the field and gain that experience.
That makes a lot of sense, and I guess it's different from quarterback when have a younger quarterback sit and watch, whereas tackle I can see where it might be more beneficial for the player to just get out there and play.
Yeah, well, also having a veteran quarterback like Ryan Fitzpatrick, you're not subjecting a young quarterback to having, happy feet because he's potentially not confident in his O-line play. You have a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick who's sitting back there and has been there and done that with every type of line, every type of team, every type of offense throughout his 16 years in the NFL. And so I think that it's a good opportunity to get him out there.
I think, like you mentioned, it is a direct indicator of the coaching staff's trust in their ability to develop Sam Cosby. I think that was one of the big reasons. There's a bit of a drop-off between his 2019 and 2020 game tape. And I guess the high athletic traits are what kind of kept his profile up there during the NFL draft process. But do you think it might be too early for the staff to really want to ship off for Moses? I mean, he's had those in-game injury concerns that have been mentioned, but he hasn't really been a guy that's missed significant time really ever in his career since, I think, his Lisfranc injury in 2014. But I guess that kind of ties in. What are your thoughts on Sam Cosby? Is this too early of a move to move on from Moses?
I think the overarching thing that makes this all doable is how well Cornelius Lucas stepped in and played last year. I think there were a lot of questions of how good he was going to be. Certainly when we saw him in training camp, he seemed to not be faring too well against that defensive line. That being said, a lot of folks don't fare well against the Montez Sweats and Chase Youngs of the world, so you can't blame the guy too much. But the fact that he was able to step in and play as well as he did and be as competent as he was at left tackle, I think gives them confidence that if Sam Cosby isn't that guy at right tackle, they can plug and play Lucas until you end up in that situation. Lucas is another guy who has experience on the right side. Most of his time is on the left, but certainly he came up in the league as a right tackle, so he can slide over there probably without too much issue. As far as looking at Sam Cosby, the good stuff for him on tape is very, very good. And had he come out after the 2019 season, he probably would have been a first rounder. He slipped a little bit because of that 2020 play, but I think you saw it a little bit when Ron Rivera was talking about De'Ami Brown, the wide receiver from North Carolina. The dude has highlight plays, but has a lot of mental lapses, and that was where some of those drops came in. I think you can say the same in some regards with Sam Cosby. When he plays well, it's elite. The problem is that he takes too many plays off, or he has too many mistakes on tape, and most of those are more effort than they are ability. And so I think John Matsko and Ron Rivera are confident after talking to him in the pre-draft workouts and whatnot that they're going to be able to overcome that. And I think that ultimately it's going to be his job to lose. And I think he'll be when we open up OTAs next week and then mini camps, I think we'll see Sam Cosby on the right side with that starting 5-0 line.
With the inevitable divorce of Morgan Moses and the Washington football team, do you think that any of that money could possibly be going towards a Brandon Sheriff contract in any realm? What percentage of a chance do you think that might be?
The money situation with Morgan Moses, I think, is being overplayed a little bit. He's owed $7.5 million this year. He has $2 million guaranteed, so it's really a $9.5 million cap hit. That $7.5 million isn't enough to make a difference in a Brandon Sheriff deal that's ultimately going to be in the $15 million, 5-6 year range, or if you want to go further down the line and talk about whether it's in a John Allen deal or not. I think it's simply that the drop off from Morgan to Cornelius Lucas or Sam Cosby wasn't worth the headache of having to deal with four guys who all want time on the field. And I think ultimately Morgan was more of a road stoppage or road blockage for getting your rookie in the second round, Sam Cosby, on the field. And I think it's as simple as that. Now, the team's in a pretty good financial situation, and it's not something that we've seen in Washington very often over the past 2 decades in relation to the cap. So I think that they will have money available to potentially re-sign Sheriff or John Allen. I just don't think Sheriff's deal is going to happen. I think ultimately he wants to hit the open market, and once he hits free agency, he's going to be arguably the best guard available in free agency, and somebody's going to outbid Washington for his goods.
So staying on the topic of offensive line, Washington acquired Eric Flowers week before, or just a couple of days actually before the NFL draft. Did not cost them a ton to do so, but that has kind of brought up the debate of who the starting left guard will be heading into 2021. Schweitzer played pretty good down the stretch, both in the wake of Brandon Sheriff's injury and after Charles got injured in that game against the Giants. A lot of people, with how Eric Flowers played in 2019, obviously it's for a different staff, but he still had some good football, or the best football of his career that year. And Sidney Charles, too, still a dark horse. So is there anybody you see, is Schweitzer still the favorite going into camp, or could we see Flowers or maybe Sidney Charles unseat him for that spot?
I think Flowers is probably your favorite there to be the starting left guard. Certainly, Schweitzer is going to push him. I think Sidney Charles, I'll get to in a minute. I think he's a little bit further back than the two of them. I think when you look at game days, you're going to be looking at Flowers and Sheriff probably as your two starters, and then Schweitzer is going to be your kind of backup swing guard. But that's not to say that Schweitzer can't potentially beat out Flowers for that starting gig. And one of the things that makes Flowers valuable, and Ron Rivera talks about it all the time, is positional flexibility. He can play guard in a pinch, in a terrible situation where all your tackles get hurt. You can slide him outside, and he can be, your emergency tackle as well in case that situation arises. As far as Sidney Charles goes, I think that this is going to be, he had as many injuries as he did snaps played last season. I think that this is going to be a developmental year for him at guard. And ultimately, I think that the plan, if you were to ask John Metzko and Ron Rivera and the offensive staff, I would think the plan would be to get him coached up, get him ready to go, and have him slide right in at right guard with Brandon Sheriff when Brandon Sheriff leaves next season in free agency. With all the depth that they've built across the O-line, but honestly across the entire team, it's created a situation where this coaching staff can start playing chess. They can start working a couple moves ahead. They can start planning for when players are going to have to leave in free agency. You look at the defensive line, you have Jonathan Allen's going to be a free agent after this season, Daron Payne the year after that, Montez Sweat the year after that, Chase Young the year after that. So, they're not going to be able to re-sign all four of those guys. So they're going to have to start picking and choosing where these guys slide in, not to mention Matt Ioannidis is done at the end of 2022, I believe. You're in a situation where there's a lot of depth at a bunch of different positions, and it allows this team to start positioning guys to be ready to go, not just for this season upcoming, but to get them ready to go for 2-3 years down the road. And that's a luxury that this organization hasn't had in a long time.
Yeah, you see teams like Seattle and Pittsburgh come to mind where they constantly replace their draft picks, and even Baltimore, and they get compensatory picks out of it, and they continue to replace their roster through that. And I think we're beginning to see the beginning of Washington having that luxury, like you just said, and it's nice to see them, build toward the foundation of the team to sustain success over a long period of time.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the Morgan Moses soon-to-be departure, you're in a situation where you have depth, so there are going to be good players that get cut, traded, released, not on the team, not starting, that, in years past, we would all be up in arms because, the depth was listed to the top 20, the top 11 on each side, and there wasn't a whole lot there where guys could step in. So I think you're just seeing, a football team that's being built to win now, but also being built to sustain it for the future.
On the topic of cuts, since we're leaning towards that being what's going to happen to Morgan Moses, do you see any other surprise cuts that might happen along the offensive line during training camp or beyond?
I think it's going to be tough to see a situation where Jaron Christian's still on this roster. I don't know if that's a surprise because he basically hasn't done much in 3 years since being drafted in the third round. But he's a guy that's kind of been there for a while, so he's been kind of on everyone's radar. He just hasn't developed as anyone kind of expected him to, and unless he's going to take a huge step forward this year, I think he's going to be kind of the one name that folks know that they get rid of. The other one, maybe Wes Martin. I don't know if he has a spot. They have a lot more depth now at guard. That being said, he is a draft pick, so they do have a fourth-round pick. They do have 2 more years with him, but I don't think there's too many surprises necessarily on this roster that will kind of blow people out of the water, like Morgan Moses or obviously Ryan Kerrigan being allowed to sign elsewhere. So I think we've seen the biggest of the cuts already.
So obviously the Washington football team just wrapped up their 2020 draft. Pretty solid draft, taking Jamin Davis, number 19 overall. A lot of depth pieces behind it. Had a pretty exciting guy in Diami Brown in the 3rd round. Wasn't a sexy draft, but it was very solid by a lot of pundits' opinion. I'm curious to know what your opinions of the draft were, Mitch, and some of your favorite pieces.
Well, you stole the words right out of my mouth. I've been saying from the beginning that it was an unsexy draft, and that's okay. It was just kind of a very solid draft through and through. You got players with kind of high floors, which I think is important. And when you look at Jamin Davis at 19, you hope that he develops into an all-pro and a superstar and all those things. But I also think that he has the highest floor of any linebacker that's kind of stepped foot in DC since London Fletcher. I think that he's a guy that you're going to plug and play on day one, and he's going to step in, and he's going to be your starter for the next 5 years of his rookie deal, and hopefully, they can get a second contract done with him, and he can be here for a decade. I think he's a perfect kind of Ron Rivera guy, super solid. He's going to finally be able to. They're finally going to have somebody who can cover tight ends. Coming down the middle, coming over the middle. I think that was a super solid pick. You go beyond that, I like the Sam Cosby pick a lot. We've talked a lot about him already. I think that he's going to step in and be able to be a starter as well. And you hope that De'Ami Brown can be as explosive as it seems he can be. I mean, if he's a Terry McLaurin comp and they end up with two Terry McLaurins, one in Terry and one in De'Ami Brown, that's pretty damn good. But the only other real kind of thought about it was those 7th round defensive ends are really why I think Ryan Kerrigan was out the door. William Bradley King and Shaka Toney. I don't know that they're necessarily going to make this roster, but I think the two of them combined with last year's 7th rounder James Smith-Williams can fill the role that Kerrigan filled last year. And honestly, he was a situational pass rusher, and I think you're going to be able to get something similar from those guys. And when you look at Matt Ioannidis coming back and Tim Settle having another year under the belt, and John Allen's kind of maturation and transformation to be able to rush just not from the inside but from the outside as well, you ended up in a situation that it was sad to see Kerrigan go, but it wasn't necessarily the biggest surprise in the world.
I think a point you just mentioned there was that I definitely agree with is the 7th round defensive ends. They don't really have, with the Ryan Kerrigan departure, as you just mentioned there, they're pretty much coming into a role to be that situational pass rusher. We saw Kerrigan snaps really decrease as the year went on. I think he got to a little around 15% maybe, if I'm remembering correctly. But there aren't a lot of situations where Sweat or Young should really be off the field. But I think chances are with Washington's defensive staff and with the talent around him, I think we're looking at probably at least one of those guys between Smith-Williams, Bradley King, and Toney, at least one of them developing. And I don't know if you have a favorite out of those three. I really like William Bradley King, but I'm excited to see what happens there.
Yeah, I think James Smith-Williams is the most developed of the group. Last year, Nate Katzer, the special teams coach, talked about him being just a superstar on special teams, and he is a freak athlete, and his speed and his power is what kind of made him, and his want to on special teams is kind of what made it, so what made him stand out so much. I think that he's going to have an opportunity to see a little bit of playing time this year and get on the field. Shaka Toney and William Bradley King. I think William Bradley King ultimately is going to be a practice squad guy. He seems to be a guy that needs a little more development. He is also a guy that is super athletic and super strong, but pretty raw in terms of pass rush moves and defensive end, I would say, skill per se, where Shaka Toney's a little bit more developed. So he might be able to step on the field a little bit quicker than WBK. But ultimately, I mean, there's not a ton of depth behind Montez Sweat and Chase Young. So, I mean, you got to hope that those guys stay healthy, but they are two of the best in the NFL. So you can kind of hang your hat on those guys being on the field for 90% of the plays.
One random out there question I just wanted to throw at you. Besides Jamin Davis, if you had to pick one offensive player and one defensive player from the Washington football team's 2020 class to win Offensive Rookie of the Year and Defensive Rookie of the Year, who would you pick?
I mean, on offense, there's really only one option, and it's not going to happen, and that's De'Ami Brown.
I was hoping you'd say Cosby.
Dax Milne probably isn't going to make the roster, and tight end John Bates is much more of a passer than he is a catcher per se. So, I mean, I don't think they have an Offensive Rookie of the Year on their roster. I think Jamin Davis has a excellent opportunity to win Defensive Rookie of the Year and let the Washington football team become the first team to have back-to-back Defensive Rookie of the Years. That being said, if you want to go outside of that, I just don't know that any of the other guys are going to see the field enough. I guess Benjamin St. Juste is probably going to see the field the most of the rest of the guys. Derek Forrest is going to be a special team stalwart. I have no doubt that he's going to step in, and Nate Katzer is going to love him. He's going to see the field a lot. But Benjamin St. Juste is going to have to as well. But, that corner group I didn't. It's not necessarily deep, but there are a lot of dudes that have a lot of playing time, a lot of NFL playing time on it, a lot of experience, and so I just don't know that St. Juice is going to necessarily be able to break that lineup early on in his rookie year.
And one last question before we wrap it up with you, Mitch. I've seen that they don't have a spot for training camp this year. Have you heard any potential rumors of where one could be?
No, not too much. I would be surprised if we don't see them back in Richmond for at least a portion of camp. I think it might be less than in years past. And in years past, they'd be there for about 2 weeks, and then they'd go play the first preseason game and go back for one more kind of long weekend there. I think we might see them maybe open up camp in Richmond, like get there. They open up on Wednesday. The players show up and do their conditioning test. Thursday's the first day of camp. Then maybe, practice Friday, Saturday, have fan appreciation day on Sunday, and then be back in Ashburn for the rest of it. The Richmond setup isn't the most ideal for NFL training camp, and just in that there aren't meeting rooms at the facility. So basically the team has to take the bus from the hotel to the facility, practice, shower, change, take the bus back to the hotel to do all their team meetings and meals, take the bus back to the facility to do their afternoon practice. Wow. There's a lot of – Ron likes to run a tight ship, as I think we've found out. And I don't know that the Richmond facility really leans into the way that the military precision that Ron likes to do. But I think they'll be there for a couple of days and then ultimately back in Ashburn for the full time.
That's interesting insight. I appreciate that. It'll be interesting to see if we can make it out to training camp as fans this year. I certainly hope that we can. But Mitch, thank you very much for giving us your time today, and we hope to talk to you again soon. Guys, if you're listening, make sure to follow Mitch at Mitch_Tischler on Twitter and Instagram, and be sure to listen to his podcast, the Washington Football Talk Podcast, with JP Finley, Mitch Tischler, and Pete Haley. Thanks again, Mitch.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you.
So the other night, I went to bed hearing the news that Ryan Kerrigan would no longer be signing with the Washington football team. That obviously piqued my interest. I didn't know if the team and him had stopped discussions or if they had ever even had any, or if he had secretly signed with another team and he just hadn't announced it yet. And I woke up the next morning and found that he indeed had signed, and he had signed with the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, we all know that Ryan Kerrigan was, I don't want to use the word disgruntled. Maybe I do. Over his playing time, he still sees himself as a starter. He had 5.5 sacks last year in spot starting and rotational situations. Obviously, when you have guys like Chase Young and Montez Sweat in front of you, it's really hard to compete with their level of youth and athleticism, even when you are the Washington football team's all-time sack leader. He took a very small deal, but it seems that he wanted to go somewhere where he was going to have more of an opportunity to start. But one can't help but to think if he signed with Philadelphia to maybe get back at Washington just a little bit. How you feeling about this, Jess?
It's tough. It's tough. You mentioned it. He had that message on his Instagram account the night before. Very heartfelt, nice edit, just kind of recapping and a thank you to his time in Washington. And give or take 10, 12 hours later, you wake up to a Eagles Fly edit on Kerrigan91 on Instagram. To mention to your point that he wanted to sign with the Eagles to get back at Washington, I can kind of see where some of that rationale comes in. I think, the other suitors that were mentioned for him were Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, which I believe. I don't think he would have been signing for starting opportunities at either one of those spots, but not sure if he's even going to be a starter in Philadelphia. But I think what makes the most sense, I obviously don't know what the details were for any offers from the Steelers or the Bengals, but the Eagles contract came out to about $1.5 million, maybe a little under $2 million. I think that it has to be more so just it's an easier transition for his family, I would assume. I mean, he's been in Richmond or Northern Virginia for the past 10 years, just had a baby a few years ago. I just really think of those three options, Philadelphia was the easiest transition for him, and it just so happens that Washington is in their same division. I don't think that was something he would have necessarily had in the back of his mind when making that choice.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just kind of begs the question to me still. Even if even if the team didn't want him to start or had no plans of starting, I wish they would have at least had a conversation with him instead of telling him right away, we're not pursuing you at all. I mean, maybe they just knew that he wasn't going to take a deal to be a rotational pass rusher, and they just had already established that. And I'm being nostalgic because Kerrigan's been one of my favorite players over the last 10 years, but I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of a lackluster of an exit. Maybe he's got a 1 year deal with Philadelphia. Maybe he'll come back after a year or something and retire with us. But you still hate to see him go. It's a tough one.
I mean, this does happen a lot of times though when it comes to, I guess I won't declare Kerrigan as an NFL legend. I'd say he's definitely a Washington legend, but just big time franchise players in their teams. I kind of had not really thought about it until I listened to the recent, or until I was listening to the Junks actually the next day, and they were talking about how Brian Mitchell, played 3 years for the Eagles after he left Washington. Also played for the Giants. Charles or Dexter Manley.
Art Monk.
Yeah, Art Monk using the Eagles example as well. I mean, Dexter Manley, he's probably the second best or best pass rusher in competition with Kerrigan for franchise history. He went to Tampa Bay and Arizona and Arizona, I believe, was a divisional rival at the time. So, I mean, it's not as uncommon as one might think with, I guess, players bouncing around and happening to land on the rival team. It just, and I've seen a lot of people that are actually like very upset at Kerrigan for this decision. I I can agree with being upset at the team necessarily not doing what was, I mean, given the contract details, what was right to keep him. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, Ryan Kerrigan really owes Washington nothing for he has been the most consistent, I mean, productive and reliable over his 10 years in the nation's capital, often a bright spot in a lot of bad seasons. Uh, like it's once Washington tells Kerrigan, we're not bringing you back. I don't think it's in the back of his mind to say, hey, let me not go to this potential opportunity because it's a rival of my former employer. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It just, it's still he's signing with the Eagles, so it still makes you think about it a little bit. And like knowing Kerrigan's a character, I don't see that in him at all, but it just sometimes makes you wonder. But we'll definitely miss Ryan Kerrigan. I hope nobody tries to wear 91 again because we don't retire numbers, but I don't think anybody should be wearing 91 in the Burgundy and Gold. He will be missed.
HBK one last time.
You
HBK.
broke my heart, kid.
I liked your comment on that. A whole new meaning to heartbreak.
Like, no, dude.
Uh,
I like woke up and just yelled. I was like, no. It's terrible. It
living.
looks so bad.
I know it. I mean, I can't. It's not like. I mean, I also saw some people talking about like it was when Bryce, I think Bryce Harper was the most recent Washington athlete to leave for a big time rival, I guess. But with Bryce, it was an entirely different situation when it came to, Kerrigan's at the tail end of his career. With Bryce, it was. I mean, we're getting a little off topic here since this is national stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing in the location he went to, but I can't really have a gripe with it considering the expected impact Kerrigan will make, and then given I guess the variables or the context of the situation.
Harper was definitely worse, I think. Like, this is the end of Kerrigan's career, and it was like I don't know, just the way that Harper left was like it put a bad taste in my mouth. I don't think Kerrigan's got a little bit more class, but I digress. We recently signed another free agent after the draft free agent. That was recently released safety Bobby McCain. He was a captain starting free safety over in Miami. High character guy. People seem to like him a lot. It's not too fast, but it doesn't seem like Ron Rivera puts a whole lot of value in the free safety position, but he wants somebody back there that's competent. And although he only has 7 career interceptions, McCain is someone that is confident back there, could be a vocal leader for the defense. What are your thoughts on this signing, Jess, and how do you see him fitting in?
I think McCain starts at free safety. I mean, he's got some competition there with Jeremy Reeves and Shazer Everett. Everett played some good football in relief after Troy Apke got benched last year. Jeremy Reeves is really good towards the end of the year, but I think with McCain's versatility and his experience, I don't really see a situation where either of the other two should be starting really over him. I think, it does offer the question of what happens with Landon Collins. There have been some rumors that he could be a post June 1st cut. That we shall see. But I'm assuming Landon Collins moves into the big nickel role on defense. But yeah, I think McCain's going to be their free. And I saw the deal is for about $1.5 million per year, which is really good. I mean, obviously it's May, nearing June. Not going to be handing out a ton of big money deals, but 1 year, $1.5 million for McCain to be your probable starting free safety is a hard to dislike move.
Yeah, I don't see any negatives about it. It's kind of like it kind of reminds me like an Adam Humphries type deal. Nothing long term, but he's a good, reliable guy that he's not going to go in there and lose you the game. And add some veteran leadership, and the signing of McCain will likely pushes Apke out the door. I would have to say, given Jeremy Reeves' late season performance and the fact that Shazer Everett has been a stalwart on this roster and special team unit for years. So I think Apke gets the axe key.
The end of an era for Troy Apke. But, I mean, we both even just forgot to mention Derek Forrest Jr., who's also
Yeah.
I mean, Mitch just mentioned how he'll be primarily playing special teams. There was some thought that he could be a dark horse to start free safety, but I think with the McCain signing now, it kind of pushes the Forrest defensive snaps idea kind of out of the window. But, I mean, someone mentioned, I'm blanking on who this was on Twitter. Maybe it was JP Finley. Maybe it was Ben Standig. But someone mentioned that Ron Rivera loves his veteran safeties. He had Eric Reed towards the end in Carolina. He had Roman Harper in Carolina, and most notably, who a lot of people compare this to, is he had Kurt Coleman on that 15-1 Carolina Panthers team. He had a veteran free safety who was beloved in the locker room, had a lot of experience under his belt. That's what McCain, that kind of role is what he's taking now. So very comparable in that aspect.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what he can do with them. There's a lot of pieces to move around. It's starting to seem like we can say that about a lot of position groups, which is really exciting, going back on what we touched on with Mitch earlier about depth. Derek Forrest was, besides Diami Brown, probably one of my favorite picks in the draft, and I'm excited to see what he can do. Another true leader. Saw a funny blurb on him today. Apparently, he was the team barber for 4 years at Cincinnati. So if he's good and even goes out there and starts making hits on the field, I'm just going to start calling him the barber.
Already got the nickname on lock. Already got that ready to go.
The barber.
I mean, it does make for a crowded safety room. We had that conversation about depth, but I mean, just off the top of my head, Curl's a lock, McCain very likely a lock, Everett probably a lock, Reeves I'd give an 80% chance. There's still Collins, who role to be determined. I guess we'll really see how he starts getting used in OTA's mini camp and training camp eventually. But then, like we just said, Troy Apke is likely out the door.
I agree with most of that. I personally think that Jeremy Reeves might be more of a lock than Everett right now, given Reeves is just the kind of guy that Rivera likes. Undrafted free agent, had to fight his way up, who's on and off the practice squad. And take nothing away from Shazer Everett, because he had the same similar type of path. I just think maybe it'll all depend on how Forrest performs, because I think Forrest will ultimately take over that utility safety / special teams captain spot from Everett. But I think Jeremy Reeves is more in the plans for this team than others might think. But that's speculation on my part. He played very, very well in the last quarter of 2020.
I do agree that Reeves deserves some more, credit or stock than he's given. I don't want to put too much weight into that end of season Pro Football Focus grade, which I think came out to him being the 4th or 5th best free safety according to their website. That sounds very high for the couple of games that he played. He played.
PFF.
Most notably had a really good play. I think his best play was against Dallas on a Thanksgiving game when it was third or fourth and goal when he was able to get a sack or disrupt a whatever kind of play. But I do think he is a dark horse to get some good snaps there. But I mean, they're at a logjam, so
yeah,
it really remains to be. We can't really get a good estimate of how these things will shake out until we really start seeing how things go down on the practice field.
And that in itself is a good problem to have.
It just keeps taking me back to, I mean, not to rag on Sean Davis, but for how bad Troy Apke was to start the year, considering that he had beaten out Sean Davis for his roster spot, it just makes me think, what does Sean Davis look like in training camp of 2020? Like that.
I was actually about to bring up Sean Davis a couple minutes ago. We were talking about the 1-year deals, but I was like, I don't want to put that juju on Bobby McCain because I don't think there's a chance that he'll turn out as bad as Sean Davis must have been. Like you said, was it an attitude thing? What was it? Did Troy Apke really beat this guy out in camp? Who knows? And that just goes to show you, gives you a little bit of perspective of the roster turnover in this team in the last year and a half to 2 years. Is absolutely incredible. Ron Rivera's done a bang up job. I'm 32 years old. This is probably the most excited I've been for a Washington season in my entire life, save maybe 2012. But this is incredible. I'm excited for the future.
I agree. The roster definitely has rounded together well. I've been looking through it the past couple of days, and there's not obviously quarterback is the X factor with however Fitzpatrick plays, but assuming he is going to be the starter, there's not really, just putting quarterback aside, there isn't really glaring holes on the roster besides maybe tight end too. But all the starters, we have presumed starters or at least good competitions at each one of the spots. There's just a lot to like with how Rivera has rounded out the roster. And it has come out, obviously, at the cost of guys like, these long tenured players we talked about earlier in the pod, but the Kerrigans and the Sundbergs and the Morgan Moses of the world all being shown the door. And I guess that comes at the cost of the coach wanting to reshape the roster in his view.
Yeah, we are definitely in changing times. Glad to be a part of it. And this is, if you had asked me if anything like this would be happening in Washington roughly 3 to 4 years ago, I would have thought you were crazy. And we're coming up from the trenches. This is an exciting time to be a Washington fan. That's all we have this week, guys, and thank you so much for listening. We'd also like to share a special shout-out to Mitch Tischler for taking the time out of his busy schedule to meet with us and answer some of our burning questions. Another big shout-out to Jack Davis for creating the intro-outro music that you hear on each episode. Be sure to follow him and check out his music at jack._com. If you like the podcast, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our podcast Instagram at the BNG Review on Instagram. That's at the B, the letter N, G, Review. You can find this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Audible. Thanks again so much for your support, and go Washington.